Hello BookTube, welcome back to my 2026 library tour. In this part of the tour, I'm going to be focusing on other nonfiction. Behind me, I have a massive collection of history books. This part of the tour will feature my nonfiction collection that isn't history. So mostly science with a few other books added in, although I would like to make this part of my library a more dedicated science section. I just never get around to really doing that. First up is Underland by Robert McFarlane. This is an exploration of the underground places in the world, not just what's under our feet, but also the Paris Underground, bunkers, mines, hidden places, that sort of thing. I read this a few years ago for the 2020 BookTube Prize nonfiction section, and this was my personal favorite of what I read. I have not read the book since then, but I really would like to return to Robert McFarlane. Another really good book is The Brilliant Abyss by Helen Scales. This is her exploration of the deep oceans, and it is very fascinating. Helen Scales has a number of other books out since this, and I wish I had added them to my collection because I really would like to read more from her. Next is Imagined Life by James Trefil and Michael Summers. This is a book that extrapolates what various alien environments could give rise to extraterrestrial or non-terrestrial life. When I first read the book, it was fairly interesting, but subsequent reread, not so much. It really came off a bit gimmicky on a second read. So the next two books are part of the Lives of series from Princeton University Press. First up is The Lives of Octopuses and Their Relatives by Dana Staff. So this is a look at octopuses. So what this series does is it looks at various species of octopus and squid and cuttlefish and nautilus and give a little bit about them. And then also in this book it talks about the environmental, like the various environments that they live in within the greater oceanic environment. So the books are interesting. I tried to read this a few months ago and I was liking it, but my mood shifted over the course of reading this book, and that's why I set it aside, but hopefully I will come back to it soon. The other book in this series I have is The Lives of Butterflies by David G. James and David J. Lohman. So basically this is looking at various species of butterfly and various aspects of butterfly life cycle, that sort of thing. Have not gotten to it yet. So the next two books probably should be in the manga section of my library because they are about manga, but since they're not actually manga, I have them here. And actually this first book probably should actually be with the history section. So I don't know quite why I have it over here. And that is Manga, A New History of Japanese Comics by Ike Exner. Or Ike Exner. So this is a history of manga. Manga is Japanese comics, although manga has referred to other art forms as well. But this book is more specifically dedicated to Japanese comic books and how it developed. I have not gotten around to reading it except for dipping into the introduction, which can sometimes prove rather fatal because sometimes the introductions are the worst part of the book. So I have read and reviewed 1000 Years of Manga by Brigitte Koyama Richard, translated from the French by David Rosenowitz. So this is an overview of manga from its beginnings as a different kind of art form from the comic books that we think of today when we say manga. So this book is generally geared more towards an academic audience, an audience coming from an academic or academic art background who's curious about manga but needs an academic hand-holding, I guess. If you're a fan of manga, this book might be a bit on the annoying side, which was how my response to the book was. If you're a fan of manga, this book really doesn't tell you much that you don't already know, or doesn't really give you much interesting discussion about more contemporary manga. But one thing about this book is that it is lavishly illustrated in full color. So, yeah. Returning to science, this is Physics of the Impossible by Michio Kaku. So about 15-20 years ago, Michio Kaku started writing a series of books that look at the scientific possibility or plausibility of various aspects of science fiction. So in this book, he focuses more on the stuff that, as of right now, is fairly impossible. Most famously, faster than light travel, which he does talk about a little bit. So some of what he talks about is so he breaks things down into classes of impossibilities, which I'm assuming is class 1 is really maybe more achievable than the later one. So there's like force fields, invisibility or cloaking devices, space weapons, teleportation, that sort of thing. So when I first read it, it was fairly interesting, although I did have some issues with it. There's he's rather fond of bringing up this Kardashev scale of civilizations, and he often, I think, mistakes the size of the civilization for what their actual rank would be on a Kardashev scale. So, anyway. Haven't not read that book in years, though. Maybe I should give it another look. Really need to add more physics books to my collection. Next is The Wild Places by Robert McFarlane. This is basically McFarlane walking around Britain and writing about various extant wild places that still exist. This is an earlier book of his, and I didn't get on with it as well as Underland, but maybe I need to give it another go. Next is one of my favorite books. This is The Red Hourglass, Lives of the Predators by Gordon Grice. This is a book that looks at various predators that one would encounter in their everyday life, most of which are spiders from the cover. But it includes, of course, black widows, mantises, rattlesnakes, tarantulas, pigs, dogs, and brown recluses. This is a really, really fascinating book. So the next two books are the study of mythology. So first is Dionysus by Karl Karenier, translated from the German by Ralph Mannheim. So this is a study of the god Dionysus, or an interpretation of the god Dionysus. And it's very rooted in psychoanalytic and I think Jungian sort of interpretive strategies. So I'm not entirely sure how well received or how received Corenier's work is nowadays. This is decades and decades old. So I think perhaps the study of the Greek gods perhaps moved on from here, but I'm not entirely sure. Haven't really looked into it. And I also have The Gods of the Greeks by Karl Karenier, translated by... I'm going to go hunt this down. It's not telling me. That is annoying. So this is a Greek mythology retelling or a collection of Greek myths that take the kind of the conceit that this is an ancient Greek retelling these stories to an ancient Greek audience. And it's divided into the various gods as the focus. And I rather like this collection, even though I have not read it in a very long time. Would like to revisit it. I think this one is a bit better than Dionysus. Dionysus can get very dry, even though that's very ironic given Dionysus remit. The next two books are by Peter Mathiasson. First is The Cloud Forest, which is a diary of him going to explore South America. And I say diary because the book is basically written in the form of like a day-by-day account. So it's kind of a diary. I have never quite gotten into this book. I've never actually made it to South America with Peter Mathiasson. And then the other book I have of his is The Snow Leopard, which is him on expedition to the Himalayas to look for the snow leopard. And again, it's told in a very diary, day-by-day log style, which I really didn't get into. I've been wanting to read something by Peter Mathiasson, and I ended up settling on his nonfiction, but maybe I should try his fiction at some point. So the last chunk of my other nonfiction section is the animal series from Reaction Books. So Reaction Books, which is a UK publisher that is distributed here in the US by the University of Chicago Press, one of their series is a series of short books on various animals, either specific species or whole orders or families or what have you. So this book is on spiders and is by Katarzyna and Sergei Mikulski. And this is really bad. It is basically a psychoanalytic interpretation of spiders, and As I've said repeatedly when I have talked about this book, sometimes arachnophobia is caused by your jerk of a father throwing a live spider into your hair when you are a little girl and has absolutely nothing to do with any psychosexual baloney. Okay? And in case you're wondering, the little girl is my mother. Although my mom has since gotten over her arachnophobia, or at least towards smaller spiders. Because we had a little house spider that we almost had as a little pet until she died. But anyway. So next is Dog by Susan McHugh. This is also one that I have not gotten on with. So when I first started reading the Reaction Animal series, I really enjoyed them and obviously wanted to collect them. But then a few years ago, I started to get some really stinkers and I didn't really get on with them. And so I've stopped collecting them. And then when I tried to go back to one of them, which I'll get to, it didn't really work out. So next up is Owl by Desmond Morris. This one was okay. Probably one of my favorites is Scorpion by Louise Pryke. This is all about scorpions. Then this is the first one I read because I was doing some research on scorpions. Hyena by Mikita Brotman is also pretty good. I think oftentimes the best ones are fairly balanced in how they approach the subject and also when they have like a reason to defend the animal. That very often the authors of these particular books try to either defend the animal if there is a sustained cultural dislike for them, or they try to make it that way, which is kind of, I think, the problem with Susan McHugh's dog is she tries to make dogs not as beloved as they are so that she can then defend them, and it does not work out. Shark by Dean Crawford is fairly good. Cat by Catherine M. Rogers is more on the cultural criticism side of things and is pretty good, if I remember correctly. Rabbit by Victoria Dickinson is one of those that I have struggled to get into. Moth by Matthew Gandy is pretty good. Wish there were a butterfly one. Wasp by Richard Jones is really good. And one of the more successful defenses of a much maligned animal. Pelican by Barbara Allen is another one of the ones that I have struggled to get into. The same is true of Swan by Peter Young. Octopus by Richard Schweid is, when I first read it, I enjoyed it. But on a reread last year, it didn't work out for me. So last September, there was a booktube event called Octember, in which participants would read various books on octopuses or about octopuses or featuring octopuses and their cousins. And I tried to participate in. It didn't quite work out for me. And rereading Octopus, I wasn't as impressed with it. And then finally, Squid by Martin Whalen. This is one that I have really enjoyed. It's pretty good. Although, again, I'm wondering if perhaps the animal series is really just like a one-time read rather than like coming back to frequently, and that maybe their best place would be at like a library or something where whole hordes of patrons or kids, if it's in a school library or something, would pick it up and read it on their own as for like a research paper or something. But anyway, so that concludes the other nonfiction section of my library. Now I need to start figuring out what I want to do about the science fiction part of my library. Even though before I get to science fiction, I will do probably a twofer, because I don't have much in the way of westerns. So it'll be a very quick library episode, and then my Agatha Christie books. And then I'll have to figure out what to do with science fiction and fantasy, because it's in a very small space and it's a mess. So I will work on that and then probably do science fiction next week. But anyway, BookTube, I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now. So until I see you next time, thank you and have a great morning and afternoon.